Support comes from Empower Missouri's Affordable Housing Coalition, working to address the causes of housing insecurity and homelessness through tenant advocacy. Information at empowermissouri.org/housing.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Later in the hour, we'll preview Illinois' March 17th primary, and we'll look at who may have the edge in a high-stakes Democratic contest for the U.S. Senate. We'll also get a legal update on efforts to implement Missouri's new congressional map that aims to oust Democratic Congressman Emanuel Cleaver. But first, President Donald Trump has made perhaps the most consequential foreign policy decision during his time in elective office. Over the weekend, he ordered the United States military to attack Iran, sparking a conflict that engulfed large portions of the Middle East. Reactions among Illinois and Missouri federal lawmakers split along party lines. GOP officials largely supported Trump's decision, citing a desire to prevent Iran's government from obtaining nuclear weapons. But Democrats, such as Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth, not only decried how Trump launched the attacks without congressional authorization, but also once again got America into an overseas military conflict after talking incessantly throughout 2024 about being opposed to war.
We also can't forget how much the people of Iran have already suffered under the Ayatollah's evil regime. And now they and Americans across the region are in danger of becoming collateral damage from the Trump administration's self-selected escalation.
Joining us now to talk about how members of Missouri and Illinois' congressional delegation are reacting, and in two cases, not reacting that much to Trump's military attack, is Professor Carly Wayne, a political science professor at Washington University who focuses on international relations and the political psychology of conflict. Professor, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you for having me.
As I sort of mentioned on the outset, Republicans in Congress, including almost every member of the Missouri delegation, have supported Trump's decision, and basically every Democrat who represents Missouri and Illinois has opposed this. Has this surprised you at all?
Not at all. This is sort of a continuation of extreme partisan polarization in Congress. The Republicans have sort of predictably gone along with Trump's plans, even though they in some ways represent a profound shift in his rhetoric. And Democrats have sort of uniformly opposed this escalation in Iran.
Trump cited a lot of different things for launching the attack, including trying to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to build up its ballistic missiles program. Missouri Congressman Mark Alford of Cass County provided this rationale on Saturday for supporting the strike.
For decades, the radical Islamic regime that rules Iran has been the world's leading state sponsor of terror. It has exported violence, chaos, and instability across the globe through its proxies. For almost 50 years, the Iranian regime has brutally suppressed, tortured, and executed its own people. It is directly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American service members. I'm proud that we finally have a president behind the resolute desk who is holding this terrorist regime accountable.
That was Missouri Congressman Mark Alford of Cass County shortly after Trump announced his strike on Iran on Saturday. Professor, correct me if I'm wrong, but Congressman Alford was alluding to how Iran helped groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Israel during that clip, correct?
Yeah, Iran has supported many militant and terrorist organizations in the Middle East, including groups like the Houthis in Yemen as well. And so this is one of the United States' key reasons that they are so against the Iranian regime, among others.
In some respects, I wasn't surprised, much like you, to see the partisan split. We do live in a very polarized political environment where Republicans are going to support the Republican president and Democrats are going to oppose it. But from a consistency level, I should have been surprised. Like, Donald Trump talked all the time in 2024 about how he wasn't going to get into any wars. And yet, here we are. He has gotten us into a war. Are you surprised there haven't been more Republicans speaking out against that, given that a lot of them bought into that rhetoric?
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of doublespeak going on here, where on the one hand you have a president who's talked a lot about the need to return to prioritizing America rather than getting involved in foreign wars, who is now deciding to launch a foreign war. But I think in another sense, this is sort of consistent with his approach to how he interacts with the world, which is that he prefers unilateral action. And so I think the criticisms that he's levied about international involvements by the United States have been when they're involved with allies and partners. So he doesn't like that the U.S. is contributing more than their fair share to NATO. He doesn't like what he sees as sort of aid to Ukraine or soft power in the form of U.S. aid to Africa and things like that. But in terms of military action, he has actually shown a willingness to be extremely assertive in the international stage, including most recently, deposing the Venezuelan dictator and bringing him to the United States. So in some ways, this is sort of a continuation of the policy moves he's made earlier in his term in office.
One of the mindsets that my good friend Kathy Gilsonan has provided to me is that whataboutism can actually be useful if the whataboutism makes sense. So, yes, Iran has done all the things that Congressman Alford and President Trump and other Republicans have said. But I could say that Belarus has also destabilized NATO allies and has brutally suppressed its own people. And I could say the same thing about North Korea, but haven't invaded either one of those countries. I think I know the answer why, but rather than answer my own question, why do you think we haven't gone after those countries, but we're going after Iran right now?
Yeah, this is always the question, right? Because there's never going to be a shortage of sort of brutal dictators around the world that the United States could be opposed to on moral, philosophical grounds. So in the case of Belarus, that's a key Russian ally, of course, and Trump has been much more sort of tepid in his support of Ukraine during his term in office. He's sort of flip-flopped multiple times in terms of the extent to which he's going to support Ukraine in this conflict versus sort of pressure Ukraine to accede to Russia's territorial demands. And so I think he just does not have the appetite to attack a key Russian ally in that way, given that his own views on that conflict sort of change over time. And then for North Korea, that would, of course, mean threatening a much bigger adversary for the United States, which is China. It's not clear that the U.S. would have as easy of a time fighting a war with China, of course. They're sort of the largest geopolitical adversary the United States has in terms of strength. And not to mention the fact that North Korea has nuclear weapons. And of course, this is exactly one of the reasons a state like Iran might want nuclear weapons, right? Because you don't see the North Korean regime being toppled, and it may, in fact, be because they have nuclear weapons.
I mentioned on the outset that there were two Missouri Republicans in particular who underreacted to the news of Trump's strike on Iran, and those were Missouri Senators Josh Hawley and Eric Schmitt. They said literally nothing over the weekend. And then as the week went on, they said they're not going to support a war powers resolution. And they had, I would say, tepidly supportive things to say. But I think that the reason why their relative silence initially was notable is both have expressed a reluctance to get involved in foreign conflicts. Both of them were very much opposed to giving weaponry to Ukraine. What do you make of how the two have navigated the conflict so far, given their past assertions about foreign policy?
Yeah, I mean, I would not be surprised if privately behind closed doors, a lot of Republicans are expressing dismay at this at this new war. I think many of them are probably worried about how this is going to play out for them electorally long term, especially if the war drags on, which it very well might. So I think they're trying to thread the needle here. They're showing support for Trump in sort of the least way they can to avoid angering sort of the MAGA base, while at the same time there's some limits to what their support would be. I think Josh Hawley said no boots on the ground.
Yes,
right?
he has basically said, like, I'm not going to support a war powers resolution right now, but if it comes to boots on the ground, that's a completely different story. But before we continue talking about Schmitt and Hawley, war powers resolution, for people that might not know how that works, if you could break that down, even though I know it's a very complicated thing, that would be my next question.
Yeah, so in some ways it's symbolic, but essentially Congress is the branch of our government that is supposed to approve the United States going to war. This is not something that we, in our Constitution, allow the executive to do unilaterally unless there is an imminent threat to the United States. Although I will say that, historically, we have not had Congress declare war for lots of wars, including ones that have been fought under Democratic presidents. So that sort of power to Congress has been steadily eroding over time. But that is what the War Powers Resolution is about.
Going back to Hawley and Schmidt, when I was talking with Senator Eric Schmidt right after the United States went and snatched Nicolas Maduro, I asked him point blank, what's the difference between Donald Trump running for president on an anti-war platform in 2024 and Woodrow Wilson saying that he would keep America out of World War I and then in 1917 got America into World War I. This was part of Schmidt's answer.
The false choice here is between wandering adventurism and isolationism. The isolationism was always a slur. This is about a foreign policy where the core interests of the United States of America reign supreme. And we have a core interest in making sure we don't have an illegitimate dictator sending drugs and playing host to our adversaries in our own backyard. And so a very strategic action was taken, a very limited action was taken here, and I support that.
That was Senator Eric Schmidt talking with me earlier this year, explaining his foreign policy philosophy right after the United States went and took Nicolas Maduro out of Venezuela. I listened to that and I'm like, nothing about this Iran strike is limited. And I could make an argument that what exactly is the U.S. interest in doing that? Do you think that he basically is being dragged into supporting something that conflicts with his core philosophy there?
So I actually don't think so. I think that his sort of core philosophy is unilateralism, and I don't think he has necessarily stable preferences or stable beliefs about what he's going to do with his policy in the next month, 2 months. But I do think his sort of single stable belief that you see over time is his willingness to sort of decide emphatically, I'm going to do military force and I'm going to use military might to achieve the goals that I set out. So in some ways, I think this is sort of a continuation of a very assertive foreign policy that he thinks as America taking the rightful leadership role.
We're talking with Washington University political science professor Carly Wayne, talking about the reaction of Missouri and Illinois federal officials to Donald Trump's decision to strike Iran. So let's talk about the Missouri and Illinois Democrats. As I kind of mentioned before, they're all against this. A lot of it on procedural grounds. They didn't like the fact that it happened without congressional authorization. But I actually found Congressman Wesley Bell's sentiments to be particularly interesting. He said, quote, launching a regime change campaign without a clear strategy, a defined end goal, or honest preparation for the cause is dangerous and short-sighted. And the reason it was interesting to me is, for better or for worse, Bell is associated with AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. They spent a lot of money to get him elected over Cori Bush, and they put out a statement saying they basically supported what Trump did. Do you think that people like Bell, who have been traditionally supportive of Israel, and we should also point out that Israel attacked Iran with the United States here, are being put in a rather delicate position here?
Perhaps to a certain extent, although I think this statement by Bell is sort of a no-brainer for him. It's, when lobbying groups like AIPAC or any other lobbying group push to get certain politicians elected, they're not necessarily, it's not as much of like a quid pro quo as is implied in a lot of popular press on these issues. They're sort of investing in these longer term relationships. And so I think they know that the politicians that they support are not going to fall in line on every single vote. It's more about what the alternative would be. And I think they saw Cori Bush as a long term, much less tenable alternative for them. And I think also this is sort of low cost for Bell. All Democrats have come out against this war. And as you mentioned, they've done so largely on procedural grounds. And I think that is itself sort of strategic. every Democrat statement that I've seen has been very clear to start the statement off by talking about how horrible of a regime Iran is and all of the things they don't like about Iran. And then they just go on to say that they oppose doing this without congressional approval and that they oppose doing this without a plan. And so I think that's actually it is anti this war, but not in as strong of a way as you could be.
In the last minute or so, you mentioned that the War Powers Resolution was largely symbolic, and I guess I can maybe explain that further. It was symbolic because it was never going to have the votes to pass, and even if it passed, Trump probably would have vetoed it, and it would have not likely been relevant. But I do see it as more than symbolic, though. Like, for instance, the Iraq War resolution in 2002 was always likely going to pass, but given how poorly that went, the yays and nays for that became really important from a political standpoint, especially during 2008. We might have had a President Hillary Clinton in 2008 if she would have voted against that war. So can you talk about how there may be more than just symbolism behind that vote, even though it was not successful this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. So if the Iran war were to turn into sort of a quagmire in the same way that Iraq did, where you have U.S. troops on the ground and we're there for years and there's, no winning in sight, that you get this sort of popular surge in the United States that's anti-war in the Middle East again, and then they look and try to find the few Republicans that, voted yes on this war powers resolution, and maybe they have a leg up in that sense. The sort of staunchly isolationist wing of the party could point to that as a rallying flag, so to speak.
Well, we'll have to be monitoring this probably for the next few days, weeks, possibly even months, maybe even years. We'll just have to see. Carly Wayne is a political science professor at Washington University who specializes in international relations and the political psychology of conflict. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
When we return, we'll get a legal update on efforts to strike down or sustain Missouri's new congressional map. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. I was in Jefferson City late last month for the first day of candidate filing for Missouri's August primary. And it resembled opening day for baseball, primarily because candidates like Republican State Representative Philip Olerking of St. Louis County and Democratic State Representative hopeful Tara Murray of St. Charles County expressed this excitement and optimism about the start of the campaign season.
It's interesting seeing all the new candidates and people who are excited for their first time to run and all the ideas that they bring to the legislature about things that can be done better. And so it's really exciting.
They want something different. They want to change. They want people who listen to them. And the Democrats in St. Charles are going to be the ones who do that.
But while state legislative candidates had just a little bit of pep when they were signing up to run in the 2026 election cycle, it was a completely different story for some contenders for the state's congressional seats. That's because there's uncertainty over exactly what those congressional districts will look like. Missouri Republicans passed a new congressional map last year at the behest of President Donald Trump, who cajoled Republican-led states to redraw district lines to prevent Democrats from retaking the House in November. Unsurprisingly, anti-redistricting activists fought back both in court and through the referendum process. And one critical legal fight that remains unresolved revolves around whether the submission of referendum signatures to place the new map up for a statewide vote prevented that plan from ever going into effect. The stakes are monumentally high for Democratic Congressman Emanuel Cleaver.
It doesn't feel normal. It feels weird.
Republicans transform Cleaver's Kansas City-based district into a GOP-leaning seat. And if judges rule that the new map is in effect, Cleaver may struggle to win re-election. If a map passed in 2022 is in place, then Cleaver will almost certainly prevail and provide yet another blow to the GOP redistricting push. Cleaver says he's running no matter what.
I think I owe that to all of the Missourians, over 300,000 of them, who went out and participated in a petition referendum. And, I think they will be satisfied somewhat if they're listened to.
Some of Cleaver's Republican opponents, such as former Boone County Clerk Taylor Burks, concede that the situation is not only confusing for candidates, but also befuddling to voters. Lawmakers didn't just change the lines for Cleaver and his GOP opponents. They also significantly altered districts encompassing the St. Louis region, including the 3rd Congressional District that Congressman Bob Onder represents. Onder contends that the new map will ultimately remain in place.
Well, it is a confusing situation, but the Constitution gives the county clerks until June to certify the signatures and then gives the Secretary of State until July. So it stands to reason that the law in question wouldn't be frozen. The law was passed by the constitutional procedure of passing the House and the Senate and being signed by the governor.
One of Onder's Democratic opponents, Bethany Mann, disagrees. She pointed to past instances when submitting referendum signatures prevented laws from going into effect, including a measure barring unions and employers from requiring workers to pay dues as a condition of employment.
It's a deliberate strategy to disenfranchise not just voters, but candidates who would file to run to serve their constituency. And when we carve up the maps, we the people don't get the voice. It's representatives picking us. So as far as our strategy goes, we know full well that we're being told to campaign in the new 3rd. We feel very strongly that that will be overturned. We already have the signatures to do that in Missouri's 3rd Congressional District. So when the map goes back to the old gerrymandered map, we're going to beat Bob in that map too.
Joining us now to talk about the dark cloud of legal uncertainty over Missouri's congressional campaigns this year is Rudi Keller, the deputy editor of the Missouri Independent. Rudi, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Glad to join you, Jason.
How do you think this aforementioned legal uncertainty around Missouri's congressional map is affecting this year's midterm election?
Well, there's a lot of people who are probably waiting to file for the 5th district, especially people who, and then there are several people who are in and will find that if the map isn't used, the one passed last year, that they really have no path to victory and may decide that they'd rather spend their summer doing something else.
Yeah, I've noticed, because you covered Senator Rick Bratton's campaign kickoff. He seems really confident that the new map is going to be in place. And as of airtime, the case involving which map is in effect has not been resolved yet. And even if it gets resolved today at a Cole County level, it's going to get appealed. Why are Republicans so overconfident that the map is going to include a more Republican version of the 5th district, especially when legal precedent seems to indicate that it's going to be the old map that's going to be in place?
Well, you've covered enough campaigns to know that at this point, every politician is confident they're right.
Yes, you're correct about that, Rudi, but continue.
And so we have a series of court cases that are coming up. The People Not Politicians campaign believes they have the signatures and that they've already been verified in enough places to cause a referendum. So then it will be back up to the courts. Will we have a referendum at all? What map is in effect? Next week at the Missouri Supreme Court, we'll start even at the beginning. Did the legislature have this authority? And so this will be the first time we've gotten this whole idea up to the highest court in the state. But it's not really, shall we have a referendum or not, or which signatures to count? Is the map in effect? This is the more basic question of, did the legislature have the ability to change the congressional district map absent a new census report?
Yes, and let's talk about that, because that case, I think, is probably the most important of the morass of litigation that we have all been drawn under as Missouri political reporters. And Cole County Judge Christopher Limbaugh said lawmakers were allowed to do mid-decade redistricting because there was nothing expressly prohibiting lawmakers from pursuing that redraw. What are redistricting opponents going to try to say to the Supreme Court to try to get them to reverse that decision?
Well, it's really, what does the absence of language in the Constitution mean? There is no prohibition, there is no allowance in the constitutional provision under which redistricting occurs. It just says, when you get a report from the census at the end of, after each census in a year ending in 0, the General Assembly shall divide the state into districts corresponding with the number of representatives to which it is entitled. And so there is nothing about doing it any other time. Judge Limbaugh's ruling was that there is a legal principle. As long as the Constitution doesn't say the legislature can't do something in any area, the legislature can do it. This is going to be argued as a special case because there is a tie to a particular event, the delivery of a census report. So that's what I'm expecting to hear next week, are these similar arguments we heard before Judge Limbaugh, but before the 7 judges of the Missouri Supreme Court.
You know, I think people may look at the composition of the Missouri Supreme Court and say, well, there's 5 GOP appointees, so it's unlikely they're going to try and block a GOP map. And they're going to talk in exactly that tone of voice, by the way. I'm just kidding, obviously. But, you know, the Supreme Court in Missouri does have a pretty long record of defying GOP expectations, most recently with the law around rewriting ballot initiatives and less recently upholding Medicaid expansion. Your time horizon covering the court is longer than mine. But has it always been this way, that you can't necessarily predict what the court is going to do just based on the governor that appointed these judges?
Oh, well, certainly the governor never has a pure choice for a member of the Missouri Supreme Court. They can't just turn to their best partisan friend and put them on the court. That person has to get through a screening process, the nonpartisan court plan that presents 3 people to the governor. Now, there's rarely been a period when the governor, if he was interested, or she was interested, if we ever have a female governor, could get the particular person they want on that panel from which he was to choose. But that still is far away from just putting on the people you want or electing them directly, which is what happens in many states.
Yeah, I think that if there's anything that I've learned from watching the Missouri judiciary, especially what you just described, which is Missouri plan judges or the nonpartisan court plan, there is a level of independence based off of that is different from states where they're directly elected, or even the U.S. Supreme Court. So I will agree with you on that. I do want to just go back a minute to sort of one of the reasons why I think candidates might be filing for districts that A, they may not live in, and B, may not be competitive as they think. And that is what Secretary of State Denny Hoskins, a GOP official who's contending along with Attorney General Catherine Hanaway that the new map is effect, told me. And that is that there is no residency requirement for filing. Therefore, there really is no harm in filing. So this is what he told me last week.
When you run for Congress, you don't have to live in the congressional district. So you can file to, I live in Warrensburg, Missouri. I could file in Jason Smith's seat if I wanted to. I'm not running against Jason Smith, and I am not filing for any office. So I just want to clarify that.
That was Secretary of State Denny Hoskins talking with me late in February. So, Rudi, is the Secretary right there? And is there really no risk in people like Taylor Burks or Rick Brenden filing for this 5th District seat, even if the old map is in effect and their chances of beating Emanuel Cleaver basically go to zero in that instance?
Yeah, it really becomes a question of what does the candidate want to do. Senator Bratton ran for the 4th District seat when Vicky Hartzler ran for the United States Senate and it had just been rearranged. The person that won it was Mark Alford. He did not live in the district when he filed for office. He bought property within the district during the campaign and then has built a house since, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, and I think Bob Onder was in a very similar situation where his house was like a couple of miles away from the 3rd District, and I believe he has moved into the 3rd District. It should be noted that under the new map, all of St. Charles County is in the 3rd District, so that will no longer be a relevant concern. In the last couple minutes, there are like 8 or 9 other cases involving redistricting that are still pending. I think the two we've talked about, which map is in effect and whether mid-decade redistricting, are the two most important. But are there any other ones that you are keeping an eye out for that may be significant in this legal fight?
Well, perhaps the one that is most significant is the case over which signatures should be counted. Now, should it turn out that the signatures within the signatures they are counting, 200,000 of the 300,000 turned in approximately, that the referendum should be certified, well, then that case is less important. There is a case over in Kansas City, actually 2 cases combined in one, that went to trial last month over the legality of the district, including whether or not the bill was so flawed that it included a single precinct in 2 separate districts, therefore confusing which people are in which district and making it potentially a non-contiguous district. So there are rulings coming, there are rulings pending, and there are ancillary lawsuits between the parties fighting over other things, and I count 10 total.
Well, the real winner in all of this are all the lawyers who will be able to buy and build new houses with all the money they're making from these cases. On that note, Rudi Keller is the deputy editor for the Missouri Independent. Rudi, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely, Jason. Have me anytime.
When we return, we'll preview Illinois' high-stakes March 17th primary. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. This week marked the start of primary season throughout the United States as voters in Texas, North Carolina, and Arkansas cast their ballots in a series of closely watched intra-party contests. In less than 2 weeks, Illinois voters will decide critical primaries for the U.S. Senate, Congress, and various statewide offices. And while there isn't much suspense in some of those races, others are hotly contested and could impact Illinois politics for years, if not decades, to come. Here in studio to preview the land of Lincoln's primary is Will Bauer, who covers all things Metro East for St. Louis Public Radio. Will, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me.
And joining us from afar is Brenden Moore, State House reporter for Capital News, Illinois. Brenden, welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Great to be back with you, Jason.
Well, let's start out with the Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate, where the main candidates are Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, U.S. Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, and U.S. Congresswoman Robin Kelly. Will, polling has shown that, I guess, Krishnamurthy has had a lead, but I think depending on who you look at, it's kind of all over the place. Where is this race right now?
Yeah, I think it very well could be neck and neck. So the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association, who is supporting Stratton in this race, released a poll showing her actually ahead by 3 points. Now, of course, soon after they did that, Krishnamurthy's campaign released a poll of their own with him leading, of course. And I will point out, though, that we think probably Krishnamurthy's lead has maybe tightened a little bit over Stratton, but one of the consistent things we're seeing is that Robin Kelly's probably stuck in third, but maybe making a little bit of progress. And of course, campaigns are only releasing the polls that they want to release, and there's not a ton of independent polling. And a poll is maybe just one poll, just a snapshot, one point in time, too.
Brenden, during our Politically Speaking interview with Krishnamurthy, Will asked if the suburban Chicago congressman was possibly peaking too early. Here's his response.
It's nice to lead some polls, but the only poll that counts is March 17th. And that's the day when we find out whether I got the endorsement of the people of Illinois. And so that's really what I'm seeking to do. I'm crisscrossing the state. I think I'm probably the most active by far in terms of visiting, for instance, the St. Louis area, Metro East area. I've been there. I've lost track of the number of times I've visited.
That was Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, a Democrat from suburban Chicago and one of 3 Democratic contenders for Illinois' U.S. Senate seat. Brenden, beyond responding to the congressman, how is Krishnamurthy trying to stand out compared to Stratton and Kelly?
Yeah, Jason. So Congressman Krishnamurthy really has been the front runner of this whole race. He was the only one on television for a long time. He kind of had the airways himself for 6 months. And in that messaging, he's kind of portrayed himself as a successor to Senator Dick Durbin, that he's going to represent the whole state, maybe a little bit more moderate in temperament than Stratton or Kelly. He's definitely played up his experience in Congress. He has been in Congress for a decade. Stratton obviously has been a state elected official, but Congress is a whole different beast. But as Will pointed out, there are kind of conflicting polls now that show, Stratton and Krishnamurthy, at least maybe not neck and neck, but it's getting closer. And the Stratton's polling always showed the race a little bit closer than Krishnamurthy's. So I think really, I guess March 17th, we're going to find out whose benchmark was more correct.
I think one of the reasons why Krishnamurthy's lead has dwindled is because he's been facing just blistering attacks over the air and in debates over campaign donations connected to the Trump administration, particularly from Stratton. Here is Stratton expounding on that criticism during her Politically Speaking appearance.
If you say that I am going to be someone who stands up to Donald Trump, if I'm someone who says we need to stand up against ICE and the terror in our communities, then accepting money from those sources does not line up or align with those values. I'm not accepting corporate PAC money because I'm going to stand up for the people of Illinois, and those are the values that I have.
That was Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, one of 3 Democratic contenders for Illinois' U.S. Senate seat. Will, do you think that attack is actually working, or is it an example of a candidate grasping for small differences in a race where the candidates really have pretty similar views?
Yeah, I think it's hard to tell. In theory, right, she could be gaining, kind of like we were just talking about. And from a philosophical standpoint, all 3 of these candidates probably do agree on many of the issues, broadly speaking, and there may be minute differences or little differences, and right, you're trying to make them a big deal to show, here's how I'm different. But yeah, there is especially among younger or more progressive Democrats who may be higher propensity voters in the primary that would entertain the idea of a purity test when it comes to campaign finance. And that's why Stratton has said, I'm not taking corporate PAC money. And you see this in other races with AIPAC money, American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. But of course, Krishnamurthy and Kelly have come right back at Stratton saying, you're not accepting corporate PAC money this cycle, but in previous cycles you did. And also the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association that's supporting you in this race also took money from an ICE contractor. So it's been a mess.
And Brenden, Governor J.B. Pritzker is aiding Stratton by giving to an outside political action committee. And I think that PAC has been the source of attacks against Stratton. Can you kind of explain why having the governor's support is kind of a gift and a curse in this race?
Yeah, it really is a blessing and a curse. So, Stratton really did not have a strong fundraising base because when you're the lieutenant governor of a billionaire governor who self-funds, you're not doing a lot of fundraising. So she had to start from scratch. State and federal campaign accounts are separate. So, Raja Krishnamurthy started with $18 million in the bank. She started with nothing and has struggled to raise money for her campaign. But there was always kind of an understanding that super PAC money would come in and help her. There's this Illinois Future PAC, which has spent over $10 million on ads promoting Stratton's candidacy. Governor J.B. Pritzker has donated at least $5 million to that PAC. So she's getting financial support from the governor. She's benefiting from his endorsement. There's an ad that came out this week that really plays up their record in Illinois of them working together. And any poll you'll look at Democratic primary voters in Illinois, J.B. Pritzker is the most popular Democrat in Illinois. So if there is something to be gained by his endorsement, she'll be the one to benefit from that. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of a way where she can say, I don't take corporate PAC money, but it's easy to do that when you're getting indirect assistance from your billionaire governing partner.
The wild card in this race, in my opinion, is Robin Kelly, who has run statewide before for treasurer and served in Congress for over a decade. But Brenden, her campaign does not seem like it's gotten much traction. As Will mentioned, she is in a distant third here. There have been some Stratton supporters who feel like she is purposely in the race to sink Stratton because Kelly is apparently in a tiff with J.B. Pritzker. Why hasn't she been able to gain any traction in this race?
Yeah, similar to Kelly, or similar to Stratton, she hasn't been able to raise a lot of money. She's been way outspent by Krishnamurthy, and she hasn't had the benefit of having a J.B. Pritzker in her corner. As you mentioned, there was a little bit of a tiff a few years ago between the two of them. She ran for state party chair. She beat a Pritzker-backed candidate, and then a year later, a Pritzker-backed candidate defeated her. So they say they're past it, but that's still in the not too distant past. And she's been in this race, and if you talk to the Stratton people, they will tell you that they've tried to portray this as a two-person race between her and Krishnamurthy. They've always said that even when they were way behind in the polls, that once her name recognition gets up, once the ad spending starts, that they think they can beat him because after the millions that he spent, he has a bit of a ceiling. Even in his own polling, he's only topped out in like low 40s, and a lot of the polling shows him in the 30s. And so they think they can beat him head to head. But obviously, the wild card here is Robin Kelly. Stratton and Kelly are both black women. They both have constituencies on Chicago's south side and in the south suburbs. And the idea is that they could take support away from each other. And there's actually some super PAC spending this week. I believe the Impact Fund, which supports Indian American candidates, they've endorsed Raja Krishnamurthy, but they're running ads in support of Krishnamurthy and Kelly and against Stratton. That tells you a lot about kind of what the strategy is here, because they believe the higher Kelly's number is, the more likely Krishnamurthy will be able to win a split primary.
I do want to be clear, though, that Kelly's has played, I think, a practical role in the race. She's the only candidate that called Israel's invasion of Gaza a genocide. Stratton and Krishnamurthy didn't do that in a debate. And in this clip from Politically Speaking, she's also questioned Stratton's proposal to have a $25 an hour minimum wage.
I don't want to make empty promises or just throw big numbers out like it's realistic, because I've been there 13 years. So I've been there 13 years and only in the majority 4 of those years. So I have a good view of what's realistic and what's not.
That was Congresswoman Robin Kelly on why she doesn't think very highly of Juliana Stratton's call for a $25 an hour minimum wage. Will, do you think this type of criticism is having any effect on the race with Kelly so far behind in the polls?
That's a really good question, and I think it definitely shows that Stratton has tried to couch herself as the strongest fighter of the three. When we asked her, do you think this $25 minimum wage at the federal level is even possible? She said, voters don't want to send someone to Washington, D.C. who's going to settle. They want to, send someone who's going to fight for them. But yeah, the idea that Congress would ever go for a $25 minimum wage up from a $7.25 minimum wage is probably highly unlikely. So Kelly and Krishnamurthy saying, we'd rather go with maybe something more feasible like a $17 per hour, signaling that they're far more practical. But yeah, how does that play with primary voters? I think is a really good question.
Let's go to the GOP primary for governor, where four major candidates, Darren Bailey, Ted Dabrowski, Rick Heidner, and James Mendick, are trying to take on Pritzker in the fall. Brenden, this seems like a pretty competitive race to take part in a general election where the GOP will have long odds. How do you see this primary stacking up?
I think that Darren Bailey is going to be the heavy favorite on March 17th. I would not be surprised if that race is called shortly after polls close. There was an effort among some in the Illinois Republican Party, whatever is left of the establishment of the Republican Party, to try to put up another candidate, knowing that Bailey ran last time and lost pretty significantly to Governor Pritzker, had a hard time appealing to voters in the Chicago suburbs and in the city. Hard to appeal to voters in a city you call a hellhole. So there has been an effort to get around a candidate named Ted Dabrowski, who is from a researcher from a conservative publication called WirePoints. He's kind of a wonkier guy. And then you had James Mendick, who's the sheriff of DuPage County, and kind of a surprise entry into the race, Rick Heidner, who's a businessman and video gambling mogul in the state. So Heidner and Dabrowski have raised a little bit of money, have some prominent endorsements, but they're just the vibe that I'm getting, people I talk to, is that it's not really moving the needle. Bailey still has a lot of name recognition, is still very popular. He's the only downstate candidate. About 60% of the vote is probably going to come from downstate in this primary. So he's heavily favored. I would not be surprised if he gets a number close to what he got in the primary last time, which was about 57%.
Will, in the last minute that we have, I think the problem for Republicans is the state's just not as conservative as the national GOP. We talked about it last time that Illinois has a large Latino population that polls say detest what Trump is doing on immigration. What do you think it's going to take for the GOP to dig out of their hole in Illinois?
I think it'll really take someone who's willing to break with the Trump administration and, say, here's where we think they've gone wrong. But that's a really thin needle to thread in a race where you still need to win the primary, right? And that doesn't look good for the Republican primary base. And I think like Brenden was saying, it'll be really interesting because maybe those three other candidates other than Bailey will kind of split the anti-Bailey vote, but Bailey's probably, going to be the heavy favorite. But whether or not they can do it in 2026, tough year for Republicans anyway.
I was going to say, if this was any other year, I would say maybe, because maybe there's some Pritzker fatigue. But I remember 2006 when Rod Blagojevich was extremely unpopular, and he won by 10 percentage points because Republicans were even more unpopular.
And Bailey, like Brenden was just saying, in 2022 came within 12 percentage points. And that, in theory, was going to be a pretty good year for Republicans, or as good as it was going to get.
Well, we'll have to see what happens. There also are a number of competitive congressional primaries in Chicago that Brenden has been following, as well as Nikki Budzinski's primary as well. So if you are into Land of Lincoln politics, be sure to pay attention on March 17th. Will Bauer is St. Louis Public Radio's Metro East reporter. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
And Brenden Moore is with Capital News Illinois and is their State House reporter. Brenden, thank you again for coming on today.
Always a pleasure, Jason.
And if you want to learn more about Illinois' March 17th primary, be sure to go to St. Louis Public Radio's voter guide at stlpr.org/voter guide.
Broccoli Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wissentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.